Hello indie game fans, 2020 Part 2 has been a very strange year for a number of reasons, where we did get to see some of the effects on the indie game industry with the number and type of releases, but developers never fail to impress, so here's a look at some of the best releases this year. It's been a wild ride for me personally, with this channel being one of my personal highlights of the year, so if you have been along for the ride, thank you for the support, and if you're new, hop on board as we blast off into 2022. Let's begin with Eastern Exorcist, a beautiful 2D Souls-like with an almost hand-painted look, impressing due to the art, action and overall theme. This has a two-protagonist setup where each has their own story campaign, but the deliberate, stamina-based Souls-like combat is the highlight. While the level designs themselves are not particularly interesting, as a gameplay first person myself, I did enjoy the challenging combat. Interestingly, we are beginning to see more Chinese developers and games in the indie space, showcasing their own culture and mythology, which is what I love about indie games, where many such developers are coming to their own with some excellently made games, so I hope to see that trend continue into next year and beyond.
Your attention please. We are now boarding the Limitless line at the Sunset Station.
Humor in games is always tricky to get right, since it can either be too cheesy such that it makes you roll your eyes, or not funny enough since the jokes don't land, but one game that managed to thread that needle is Turnip Boy Commits Tax Evasion. This is an adorable looking pixel art Zelda style action adventure game where you play as the eponymous character having to help the mayor after being caught evading tax, now having to take down the corrupt government from within. Do note that it is on the shorter side of things, but it's time well spent, where if you wanted more, the developers released an update titled The Sunset Station, which adds an infinite combat dungeon set in a train, making this even better. Remember when I talked about Chinese developers making an impact? Well, Bright Memory Infinite is another example of that, following on from the proof of concept release named Bright Memory that released out of early access in 2020. The solo developer did manage to staff up and made a modern action first-person shooter, adding mythological monsters alongside a futuristic military setting. It can be described as adding character action elements from games like Bayonetta or Devil May Cry into a great first-person shooter like Crysis, adding a sword, grappling hook and mobility options in addition to rifles, being a title for fans of the genre.
Let's get some animals.
A smaller pixel art title that I quite enjoyed is Let's Build a Zoo, one that combines my favourite theme in tycoon games with my favourite art style, but does introduce new ideas with a twist of their own. As with most tycoon games, you are building attractions, getting animals in, attracting visitors, breeding animals, researching unlocks, and trading with zoos from all across the world, but things get interesting when you're allowed to cross-breed animals and even have the option to be evil. Crossbreeding is fun, since you can see how the pixel art combines, resulting in a cow with a chicken head for example, and the evil alternative in running a zoo means that you can farm animals for slaughter, being a pretty dark take, but it's interesting that the option is there. I'm breaking my rule of no early access games on a list like this, since there have been a couple that I think deserves a spot, beginning with Dyson Spear Program, one that was released way back in January and has become excellent in the months since then. It has you building a Dyson Sphere, a theoretical sci-fi megastructure that completely encompasses a star to harness its energy, theoretically allowing the civilization to access the power that it needs to become spacefaring, where you start on the ground on a single planet and then expand to an entire star system. If you're not familiar, this is a factory builder game like Factorial, where the name of the game is to set up automated resource gathering and production lines but on a much grander scale. It has got an amazing 5,000 Steam reviews as of recording, so to say that it's popular is an understatement, but that is for good reason since this game is great and only looks to get even better. A title that I was very excited about is the 2D action platformer Cyber Shadow, since, of course, I loved the pixel art, but ended up surprising myself at where this landed on the list. It is a beautifully made title, reminiscent of classics like Ninja Gaiden, where you play as the last surviving member of a ninja clan, having to battle enemies and bosses on your way to defeating the villain. While it is an excellently made title, I guess the novelty of a retro pixel art game has begun to wear off in that aside from the graphics, there isn't anything too new or crazy in terms of mechanics or hook, but it's worth a play nonetheless. One of the very pleasant surprises of the year for me is OPUS Echo of Starsong, a gorgeously made narrative game that is beautiful on so many levels, from the art, story, themes, visuals and swelling soundtrack. It tells the story of two protagonists, a girl who can hear the mysterious intergalactic sound waves known as Starsongs, and a boy who is on a mission to search for the source. It is not the most challenging game in terms of gameplay, but it's a wonderful title worth experiencing. On perhaps the polar opposite end of OPUS Echo of Starsong is the grimdark Metroidvania GRIME, one that is set in a brutal world where you play as a living black hole squeezed into existence as a world collapses upon itself, where you pretty much end up in an unknown world and go about fighting enemies just because. In contrast to the usual fantasy or sci-fi enemies like skeletons, aliens, orcs and more, enemies here look like they are carved out of rock and root, which, in combination with the very human features given to them, does definitely add a level of creep to this game. Combat here is a highlight since the transforming living weapons are fun to use, which, combined with an almost Souls-like system of dodging and parrying, makes each encounter pretty fun. It was a little buggy at launch, but I think that has mostly been sorted out, so if you want a great Souls-like Metroidvania, this is one to get.
No one knows what made them attack. But one thing's true. Frog spawn show no mercy. Taunting. Killing. Feasting on rat flesh. Until only their foul bog stench remains.
Speaking of 2D Souls-like Metroidvanias, Tales of Iron is another must-play in the space, one that is set in a brutal medieval world filled with anthropomorphic animals, where it is truly survival of the fittest since the losers get eaten. You play as the heir to the Red Throne, whose father was murdered and kingdom invaded on the day of your coronation by the brutal Frog Clan. It is therefore a mission of revenge, as you barely escape with your life, having to rebuild your strength, gather allies and kill those who are responsible. The deliberate combat is an elegant dance of death, with the expected RPG systems of stats and equipment, all with a gorgeous art style and the narration of one Geralt of Rivia, earning a well-deserved spot. Of course, no video talking about the best games of 2021 will be complete without mentioning the third-person survival action title Valheim, so I have to break my rule of no early access games once again, but I'm more than happy to do so since this is so popular for good reason. You play as a Viking, having to bring order to the 10th world by taking out the enemies of Odin, which of course comes in the form of gigantic monstrous bosses. They are the expected survival crafting elements of building a base, setting up a farm, crafting and upgrading equipment and so on, all polished up to an excellent degree here with a unique art style. Perhaps they got lucky with the release in February when not much else was releasing, but for this team of initially 6 developers to have come this far is nothing short of amazing. Another no-brainer pick for the list is the action-adventure game Eastward, one that was on my list of upcoming pixel art games for a very long time and did not disappoint with the release. It is an interesting two-character setup between a grizzled old man and a young girl finding their own path through life after humanity was forced underground by a toxic presence on the surface. This is just a treat for the eyes, with a tremendous amount of effort going into the backgrounds and environments, so it earns a well-deserved spot. Although it is a little exposition heavy with one too many cutscenes that does affect the flow of the game.
환영합니다, 손님. 이곳은 도서관. 전 도서관의 관장이자 사서 엔젤라입니다. 이곳에서 당신이 원하는 것을 찾을 수도 있지만 당신의 모든 것을 잃을 수도 있다.
I told you to keep an eye on Library of Ruina, since this is a deck-building RPG from a Korean developer that is certainly worth a play. It has you working at the eponymous library, where defeating a visitor will turn them into a book, to be added to the ever-growing collection up until you find that one singular perfect book. Yes, the premise is as weird as it sounds, which makes it very interesting, but the deck-building combat does add to the game. Rather than straightforward moves and attacks, cards here can result in multiple actions per turn, so it's adding layers into a now common combat system. This is also set in the same universe as the developer's previous game Lobotomy Corporation, although no prior knowledge is needed, but I do think that both are worth checking out.
부디 당신의 책을 찾으실 수 있기를.
To be honest, it's not really fair for top-down action roguelites that released in 2021, since they had to follow up from Hades, which is no easy feat, but in spite of all of that, one game that still managed to impress me is Dreamscaper, one that has you literally battling your nightmares while having progression systems and relationships with NPCs in the day. From this trailer alone, you can see how gorgeous this game looks, where the multiple progression systems provides a compelling reason to play run after run after run. Also impressive is that this comes to us from a team of just 3 developers, being an excellent first title, so I cannot wait to see what's next from them.
Riftbreaker Ashley, please report. Begin field-based setup.
I guess I would classify the Riftbreaker as a very meat and potatoes kind of game with some pretty decent visuals, Diablo-style action RPG combat, and something a little bit more cerebral in having to build a base, gather resources, and build defenses. As such, you can see the influences of games like Dea Billions and Factorial in this, where blasting away at massive swarms of aliens is one of the most satisfying things of the year. Thankfully, this is a linear game where you have to travel from one biome to the next, building forward operating bases in each of them with an actual definitive end rather than some of the more open-ended entries in the survival crafting space. So if you want a great self-contained experience, I would recommend that you pick this up. I'm very happy to see the success of Everhood since I came across the demo of this game many years ago and thought that it had potential then, being a rhythm RPG that does mix up genres and gameplay. I hate to make this comparison, but there's certainly an Undertale vibe to this world where you play as a wooden puppet trying to retrieve his stolen arm. Of course, the rhythm game inspired combat system is the highlight, where you need to dodge, jump over and attack, but this is in service of a much bigger world with some interesting characters, making it a cannot miss.
Another soul fouls my temple with every step. Tell me, pretender, can a man kill a god?
Let's kick off the top 10 with Curse of the Dead Gods, a stylish action roguelite that released out of early access, where I was following this game along through its development and did already impress from day one. You play as a treasure hunter, seeking riches, immortality and power as you delve into mythical temples, battling their guardians in order to do so. There is skill-based tactical combat, so you're not able to spam your attacks, which, combined with a variety of weapons and enemies, makes combat the highlight. The twist here is that there are various curses which act as negative modifiers to each run, adding another level to the variety and challenge, all wrapped up with a fantastic art style, making it a cannot miss for fans of the genre.
Indents pursue a rewarding career of enforced servitude for the Ascent Group. The Ascent Group has suddenly collapsed.
If the Riftbreaker mentioned earlier got you hankering for more Diablo-style action, a beautiful title that I would recommend is The Ascent, one that, granted, is more of a top-down shooter, but nonetheless has the loot and upgrades that make an action RPG so compelling.
We recommend the acquisition of lethal weaponry, tactical equipment, and protective armor. You should also augment your capabilities.
The cyberpunk world is excellently made as well, where the collapse of a megacorp and the resulting power vacuum forms the backdrop of the game. Needless to say, excellent action and quite an interesting main narrative are the draws, although it has a slow start and was buggy at launch, but should be patched up nicely by now.
Take cover. Blow shit up. Adapt your tactics, and switch up your weapons. Remember that the Ascent Group loves you. Until they don't.
Ready? Once you go up, there is no turning back.
2021 was a pretty decent year for Metroidvania games, where one that made an impact is Fist Forged in Shadow Torch, where you play as a rabbit with a third mechanical arm, going on a quest to rescue your friend who was captured by the authoritarian forces. This is simply an excellently made title, with gorgeous graphics and tight controls, coming to us from another Chinese developer in TI Games, who made this as part of Sony's China Hero project, once again showcasing the awesome variety of indie developers.
Old friend. Cicero, you're a traitor to all partisans. I'll knock some sense into you!
The roguelite platformer is one of my favourite genres, and while we did not get that many entries this year, Skull the Hero Slayer in particular did stand out, releasing out of early access in January. This game reverses roles, where you play as a lowly skeleton warrior who has to fight against the Imperial army who has captured his king, using a variety of powerful skull forms in order to do so. The sheer variety of these skulls are what makes this game so fun, since each acts as a different class with different attacks, with over 100 as of recording, examples of which include Genie, Rockstar, Grim Reaper, and everything in between, even landing a special crossover with Dead Cells. This comes to us from a South Korean team who I believe attended school together, graduating and forming their own company, which has had massive success on their debut title, so I cannot wait to see what's next from this team. A late entry this year is Shovel Knight Pocket Dungeon, just released within the past week and has already impressed me enough to give it a mention. This is an action puzzle game that stars indie gaming's most iconic character, adding some fun strategic puzzle action that reminds me of Super Puzzle Fighter 2 Turbo, but is unique in its own sense. Familiar characters return with a brand new villain for the story campaign, so if you love Shovel Knight, this is a no-brainer. We move into the top 5 with Record of Lodos War Delit in Wonder Labyrinth, a Symphony of the Night style pixel art Metroidvania based on the classic anime series, where it got on my radar since I love this developer's previous work in Touhou Lunar Nights. As compared to Sakuya, Delit is a little less mobile and does have more puzzle sections involving the bowl, but if you love SOTN, this is a must-get.
There are many stories in our past. Many interesting.
There are not many games left on the list, so you can probably guess the next couple of games, where Loop Hero comes in at number 4. This game has a very interesting pixel art style with an intentionally limited colour palette, where you're building out the loop and challenging your hero just enough for them to level up and gather resources while not getting killed. This is in service of defeating the boss with an impressive meta progression element as well, although things do get a little bit grindy. Still, for being one of the cleverest titles that is kind of beyond genre definitions, this earns a well-deserved spot. Honestly, Ender Lily's Quietus of the Nights would have come in much higher on the list if it was not from quite a large Japanese developer, but gets that indie tag since it is a little bit out of the mainstream and is definitely worth a play. I love my Metroidvanias, and while this is yet another grimdark entry, it does enough to be unique. A mysterious rain has turned all living beings into frenzied undead monsters known as the Blighted, while Hyrule has the power to purify these creatures and teams up with a number of cursed knights in order to do so. The most interesting part is that these knights can be former foes drawn into service after defeating them, forming the core of the Metroidvania progression, but with a layer of abstraction since our heroine does not directly attack. It's a gorgeous title that will please fans of the genre, and it's a cannot miss in my opinion. Inscription is a difficult game to talk about since developer Daniel Mullins is known for meta elements in his games, where trust me on this one, it is a very cleverly made title that is certainly worth a play. At the core of the game is placing cards on a grid to attack your opponent, where in the simplest case, you may need to sacrifice weaker creatures to spawn stronger ones. But then things get weird when the cards start talking to you and things get flipped on their head. While there are horror elements, it is nothing scary per se, just an overall sense of unease, but it's definitely worth a play. By now, if you didn't already guess, you must not have been following indie games close enough this year, so make sure to watch all my videos in 2022 to get a better grasp on the space. But my pick of indie game of the year is Death's Door, a Zelda-style action-adventure title with Souls-like, L-I-T-E, combat. You play as the Crow Grim Reaper, thrust into a grand adventure when your targeted soul gets stolen from you, now having to chase after the thief in a realm untouched by death. It is a little cryptic in a Souls-like fashion, where things get revealed at a later point in the story, but combat and gameplay is the highlight. There isn't a stamina bar per se, but your actions are deliberate, which adds a sense of challenge with the fantastically designed bosses and combat arenas. I'm a gameplay first kind of person, so this game absolutely nailed it, taking the #1 spot. For a look at upcoming indie games of 2022, watch these videos and I will see you after the jump.